Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome. I think you'll have been made aware that we are planning to record this session, and just want everyone to know about that. And we will, if we may, make a start. So can I welcome everybody this morning to this meeting of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Faith and Society. I'm Stephen Timms, the Member of Parliament for East Ham, and I'm the chair of the group. And I want to extend a particularly warm welcome to the Reverend Professor D. Giles and to Becky Payne, who will be making a presentation to us in a minute. Dee is the Professor of the History of Christianity and co-director of the Centre for the Study of Christianity at the University of York. She's led a number of big funded research projects on cathedrals, and she oversees the Centre's heritage interpretation partnerships with cathedrals and parish churches. And Becky worked for Historic England before serving for 7 years as policy officer in the Cathedral and Church Buildings Division of the Church of England, promoting and enabling the potential of church buildings as a resource for the whole community. She's now a freelance consultant undertaking projects on sustaining historic places of worship. So I'm going to hand over to Dee and Becky in a moment, and they're going to present to us the findings of a report published earlier this year called Churches, COVID-19 and Communities. It was a joint report from the University of York, Historic England, Church of England, the Association of English Cathedrals, the National Churches Trust, and the Historic Religious Buildings Alliance. And it looked at the impact of closing church buildings and restrictions on activities provided or hosted by churches on the lives and well-being of individuals and of communities. And it looked at how churches were responding creatively to the challenges of COVID-19 and adapting to new circumstances and needs. Then after the presentation, Dee, Becky and I are going to be joined on a virtual panel by Dr. Kate Giles, who's the co-director of the Centre for the Study of Christianity at University of York. She's an expert in history and archaeology of medieval and early modern community buildings, and she's published widely on that subject. She was previously the York Minster Archaeology Fellow. She's a trustee of the Yorkshire Historic Churches Trust, and she joined the Centre for the Study of Christianity team in October of last year. A warm welcome as well to Baroness Paula Udin, member of the House of Lords, who champions a range of initiatives and organisations which promote human rights, promote women's participation in civil society, and also tackle violence against women, and she works in the UK and overseas as well. And also on the panel will be Daniel Singleton, the National Executive Director at FaithAction. FaithAction is a member of the UK Government's Places of Worship Task Force. Daniel's playing an important role advising government and helping faith leaders navigate COVID-19, the lockdown and recovery. And FaithAction also provides the secretariat for our all-party group and has done ever since the group was set up in 2012. If you've got any questions that occur to you as you listen to the presentations that you'd like to put to the panel, please use the raise hand function on Zoom. Once we've heard from each of the panelists, I'm going to hand over to Daniel to moderate the question and answer session, because I unfortunately have to leave a little bit before the end of the meeting. But I know Daniel will do his best to get everyone in to ask their questions before the meeting finishes, which will be promptly at 11 o'clock this morning. So thank you everybody for being with us, and let me hand straight over to Dee and to Becky. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for this invitation. We are strongly aware that many people are working very hard on examining the contribution of faith communities across the country, of which churches are obviously just one part. But we hope that our research and the tools that we are creating with partners will make a useful contribution to those discussions. You'll be meeting 3 of the team today. All of us work in the area of churches and communities, not just as researchers, but as consultants to local churches and cathedrals, in some cases over many years. We also have extensive personal experience of the challenges of managing church and community interaction on the ground. And I gather both the recording and including the PowerPoint will be available to people. So hopefully, if we're moving very quickly through the slides, you'll still get another chance to look at the material. The project has been running since August 2020, and the survey responses and the interviews we conducted have given grassroots insights which are illuminating and often moving, as individuals from both inside and outside churches have detailed the impact on their lives of the loss of core support structures, the challenges they now face, and the key factors they believe will help them and their communities recover. And the data has been contextualized by interviews with experts in fields such as public health and bereavement and national church leaders, and the collation of a wide range of related reports. And the analysis presented here illustrates the essential contribution that places of worship and faith communities make to societal well-being and community cohesion, both in normal times and during crises. So I'm going to hand over to Becky to take us through the next group of slides.
Yeah, this slide basically explains what our objectives were. The first 2, Stephen has already explained in his introduction. I'll just move to bullet point 3. We did keep a very close eye on other research that was being done at the time by other faith groups and community organisations. That included research undertaken by Muslims into how they supported their communities, and also the Jewish community undertook research into what they were doing. 2 particular reports I just want to pick out. One is the House of Good, which was produced by the National Churches Trust. This was the first time that the contribution, the economic and social value of what churches offer their communities was actually quantified. It actually was recently updated, in fact, last month, following the changes to the Treasury's Green Book guidance on policy appraisal and evaluation. And actually, it can now be said that the contribution of churches through their buildings, through their community projects and their volunteer time can be calculated to be 55 billion a year. That's quite an incredible sum, and it shows what churches can do and hopefully what they'll be able to do under the Levelling Up agenda. The other report I just wanted to pick out was Keeping the Faith, which was produced by this group, the All-Party Parliamentary Group, which actually was very positive in saying how relationships and partnerships between local authorities and places of worship increased and improved, and how valued they were by both sides of the partnership. And both, I think it was 80% of local authorities said they wanted to continue partnering with places of worship because they realised how valuable churches are in reaching those in their communities. Next slide, Dee. This is a slide that just tries to set out the contribution of churches, some of what that 55 billion is based on, all the different areas where they offer support, well-being, all sorts of things that take place in churches or are undertaken by church volunteers in other spaces in their community. Next slide. This slide is quotes from the church side of the story, church leaders, church members, and their awareness of those groups that were actually the most impacted by the fact that church buildings had to close. And as you can see from these quotes, it's largely those groups of people who don't have access to IT or have rather chaotic lives, and how much they depend on being able to have places they can go to church buildings where they can talk to people and receive expert help. Next slide. This was something that surprised us, which is actually how much people that didn't consider them to be church members, or in fact were not churchgoers at all, how much they said they missed that period of time where church buildings were closed or were actually very restricted in what could happen. And it actually was perhaps the most moving thing for those of us who we know what churches can do. And this actually is an acknowledgement of how many people church buildings and those activities that take place in how many people they actually do reach. Next slide. This is another way of representing that data. It may be a bit small to read, but actually, fortunately on Zoom, you probably can peer in and see. The purple lines is the non-members, and you can see, in fact, in instances like support with financial difficulties and poverty, it is actually the non-members who said they benefit the most. I think this is a slide which you'll probably have to look at later in detail. Next slide. This is actually the most positive slide. This is the one that describes all the things that churches managed to carry on providing during COVID, despite all the restrictions. The restrictions did get less. Churches were allowed to reopen from June 2020, but they were still restricted in what they could take place. And we were amazed by the stories we heard of how creative and imaginative and how many more partnerships they've formed, volunteers they brought on board to actually carry on supporting some of the most vulnerable in our society. Next slide. Is this where I hand over to you, Dee?
It is indeed. Thank you, Becky. Thank you very much. If researchers had actually suggested closing all church buildings and the activities they support for a period so we could measure the impact, I doubt we'd have got much support for that idea. But as it has happened, it has provided a unique, if very costly, insight into the ways in which activities and care for those from the smallest children to those approaching the end of life, how important these things are, how vital they are, have proved to be to the well-being of the wider community. And as Becky said, much of this has been happening in different ways during the pandemic. And there has been a great deal of positive development, including building relationships with other parts of the community, greater collaboration between faith communities, greater collaboration with community partners and local authorities, and a new respect and awareness of what churches do bring to the party, in a sense, which otherwise often I think was almost invisible to people until it was taken away. Despite the restrictions, as we've said, churches have managed to do a great deal, but there's a great deal of activity which still needs to be reinstated. And the pressures and the needs of individuals and communities are still growing exponentially. Isolation, which was identified by 79% of our respondents as the key problem across communities, has had a huge impact, as we know, on the mental health of people of all ages. We had responses from mums who could no longer go to toddler groups, saying that their children had become less socialized, were shy, were afraid, and that they themselves were experiencing difficulties in their parenting because of lack of support. And we know that for older people, they were actually facing day after day after day alone, and still are in many cases, because of the fear of returning to activities and those activities not yet having been fully restored. And this is also connected to the huge problem of unsupported and unresolved grief due to the many bereavements during the period of the pandemic, where people were not able to care for the ones they were losing, they were not able to say goodbye properly, they were not able to hold proper funerals, and they themselves were neither supported properly in their grieving, nor enabled to return to ordinary activities, which are so often a very positive way out of grief and through grief. So those aspects are connected, and they remain a very important legacy of the pandemic, which needs to be addressed through the reinstatement of normal life and activities. Our key recommendations that have come out of the various reports that we've issued: greater recognition is something that is growing, but still needs to be more fully established, of the contribution made by churches. And again, we always include in this faith communities as a whole. And the fact that closing church buildings, which happened so dramatically and is still having a lasting legacy, needs to be a very, very last resort. And every effort needs to be made to reinstate openness of buildings in a safe way with the support that's needed. As one church leader said, it is about buildings. For us, no building, no GP surgery, no hospital chapel, no mental health support, no, for them, no addiction support. Churches need investment, not for their own sakes, but because of what they give to the community. They need to be recognised as the vital bases and public spaces that enable them to make a really important contribution, and which was sought out during the pandemic. Guidance is still a huge issue on the ground. We found that people have received so much rapidly changing guidance that they tend to remember, they tend to be overwhelmed. Sometimes they don't longer read it, or they remember the most negative thing that they've been told and work to that. There is a great need for guidance that enables rather than inhibits action. And churches, like other organisations, have worked extremely hard during the pandemic. Their resources have been badly hit, and they are very tired as individuals and as communities. They want to go on connecting and serving those around them in this situation of great need, and their networks and their presence in communities across the country makes them very well qualified to help in the recovery. But it's very clear that it's not enough to praise them for what they've done or to urge them to do more. They need resources, tools, guidance, and training. So that is what the current phase of the project is now addressing. We've created a simple health check tool, which helps churches to ask, where are we now in our relationships with the wider community? What are our priorities moving forward? How can we ensure our buildings are fit for purpose? And what support will we need? And we're now developing a national collaborative one-stop online portal, which consolidates and signposts a wide range of existing resources and support. There's a great deal out there, but it often isn't reaching people on the ground. It also will provide a COVID-aware toolkit for integrated sustainable community projects building on previous work and resources. And this is about increasing income generation, caring for churches, enhancing public engagement, and developing tourism. It will offer a resources bank with creative approaches tried and tested to community engagement, social care, and using buildings to promote well-being. These will be resources and ideas that can be shared, adapted, and used by churches of all sizes in all contexts. And it will make available as well, this new resource, new training modules on integrated approaches, working with volunteers, and developing community partnerships, areas which require key knowledge and skills, but are currently very rarely covered in ministerial and lay training. And finally, today, we would welcome advice from the experience and expertise of everybody here in how to circulate the reports and the data, how to promote the role that all places of worship can and must play in the post-COVID recovery of communities, and how to achieve our key recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed to both of you for presenting those findings to us. We're just going to get now some responses then from the other three members of the panel, starting with Dr. Kate Giles, who's also at the Centre for Study of Christianity and Culture.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Dee and Becky have given a very great outline of the overarching research. And I think what we're really interested in doing this morning is learning about how we can, as Dee said, disseminate our projects and our findings, build partnerships with other organisations. And it's fantastic to see some of the organisations who are here this morning. So we would love to make contact with those organisations and individuals. From my own perspective, I'm really interested to see that we have some panelists attending here from counties or initiatives that are about promoting local heritage tourism and visiting. And we have a really holistic approach to those coming into places of worship, who we tend to describe as visitors rather than heritage tourists. So another strand of what we want to do as we move forward is not just to promote all the social well-being and the benefits that places of worship can offer for communities in a caring role, but also how they can contribute to the economy moving forward as well as cultural venues. And as Dee and Becky mentioned, that's a very strong aspect of the report. So although we haven't emphasised that hugely this morning, there are really important sections looking at how we can use churches and places of worship as heritage catalysts in some areas. And there are some really interesting nuances between urban and rural areas, again, in the report details. So we really look forward to you reading the report and engaging with it. And of course, we are here to answer questions, not just this morning, but via email and by the Centre's contact details as well.
Thank you very much, Kate. Let's hear now from Baroness Udin, from Paula Udin, who's on the call too. Morning, Paula.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Professor. Good morning, Becky and Daniel and distinguished panel members. I feel very humbled being asked to say a few words because these are the kind of work that I've been involved in most of my life. I can't remember separating my faith from the work that I do, although I think that it's always different at different point of history about how much you wear your faith on your sleeves when you're doing work. And I think most of us would agree that doing the work is much more important from, sort of the inner strength that drives you. I just want to pay my tribute to Stephen and the APPG, as well as actually our Bishop's Bench, who do an incredible work to contextualize faith and the responsibility that, faith-driven conduct and how beautiful it can be, when it really functions as social action for change. Just wanted to make a few points. I mean, I was just looking at briefly what we were sent about the recommendation. And I think that not only as debates, but faith is obviously now at a center of many aspects of the community work, particularly post-COVID or within the COVID period. And I had the privilege of working with a number of organizations, including Mulberry School in our locality and Account 3. And every single person had contributed by acknowledging the importance of church leaders amongst, it's not just church leaders, the Jewish leaders, the Sikh leaders, it was such an uplifting experience. It's the essence of all the community work that I started out at the age of 16 in Tower Hamlet, not differentiating who does the work and on what basis, but fundamental sort of, collaboration is the key, and you kind of touched on that. I wanted to just say a few things about my kind of involved in this, but I also want to draw out for your attention the work of Anissa Women's Society, with whom I've had more than 30 years sort of work and collaboration. They've done over the years, over the decades, quite a lot of work on sort of faith-based, promotion of citizenship and inclusion. And many of you will be aware that faith did not feature within public discourse or government thinking, particularly from taking on board what happens to the Muslim community until sort of Blair government, when the equality duty acknowledged the importance of faith and the adherence to sort of the protective characteristics. Nonetheless, I think leadership is really important. And it's only leadership-driven work that will become of significance. And yes, we see individual leaders at local level, and they are the ones who drive changes, and not only church-based, but organizational-based. And again, I want to put into our consideration the incredible work led by the Mariam Center in Tower Hamlet, the East London, London Muslim Center, East London Masjid Mosque. And there's been such incredible outreach into all communities, because what we faced in the pandemic was so, so huge, so magnificently out of our control. And the way that many of you and many of us came together is, I think, speaks very largely the volume of the impact of faith that we put together. And I think the resources we have needs further greater strengthening, and in terms of utilization. And yes, there are respects on individual level and community level within the immediate spheres of whatever work is going on, but it's still very led within our community by men who have positions. And therefore, I think it's really important to have visible leadership and visibly accepting and acknowledging the work. I mean, Anissa Women's Society struggle for recognition of their work. The report you have written is almost identical, talking about the kind of work that's been going on at a smaller level with a lot of struggles, minus any of the resources that maybe the church can draw upon. But their work is no significant, and they didn't work, they haven't been working based on the fact that they're women, but simply because they need to drive the change and really, build a strength which
Paula, we've lost you. You've become mute. That's it.
My computer is old as I am, so it misbehaves. But anyway, I'm sure I didn't say anything important. Anyway,
Paula, just tell us the organization you're referring to. Did you say Anita?
Anissa.
Anissa.
It's the first faith-based women-led organizations in this country. It's been going on for more than 35 years. And Fuad Nadi, who kind of, I think, from Radical Middle Way, which worked with, our Labour government in formulating thinking about how faith can be empowered to empower the community. And of course, MCB has done incredible work as well under strenuous circumstances. But I just want to finish by really saying, I will do everything I can in my capacity, which is very limited. But there are many, many miles ahead now than we were in my early teens or in my 20s or 30s, when we're trying to get faith recognized as a really critical part of everyday action that many of us, just because we have faith driven passion, it doesn't really it's not an alien concept. It is exactly as the same education and changes for women and men and children in our communities. And as a social worker, you know, I'm still registered as a qualified social worker. These are the points I've been laboring in the chamber, much to the annoyance of ministers who thinks that, you know, sometime I'm speaking alien languages when I talk about the values of faith and the values of collaboration. And I just want to also tell you, I've always appreciated and valued the work of church in our, you know, communities, because I live exactly across the school where all 4 of my children went to over the last, you know, 40 years, which is a church school. And they haven't always utilized, you know, the community's spirits after school for children. And I think COVID has really pushed this agenda. I'd like to see our school do more, you know, for children beyond 4 o'clock, because the problems of, you know, many of the issues that kids like Arthur and Victoria Kalembe and many thousands of others I've seen firsthand as a social worker in Newham, Stephen, is not gone away, and they need to be tackled. So yeah, I think that church is absolutely fundamental in its new acceptance, I suppose, you know, in the fact that it has a really significant role. And I think you know, I just want to finally say that I'm really grateful to all of you, but also to the Bishop's Bench, who do incredible work to push your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, very much indeed. Very thoughtful, interesting comments, and thank you for being willing to join us this morning. Paula, I was slightly puzzled when you said you started at the age of 16 in Tower Hamlets, because I thought at the age of 16 you were at school in my constituency.
I was, and that's where I'm afraid I migrated, I want to say, to Tower Hamlet. Yeah, having got married very stupidly at the age of 16. Yeah.
Right.
Not forced, really against the wishes of my parents. I don't know. Puppy love, I think, and Donny Osmond has a lot to do with all this nonsense. But yeah, that's my relationship and my bond with, you know, Tower Hamlet and
understood.
Newham.
Yeah, well, Tower Hamlets is not far away, but no. I knew you were here and at school.
Yeah.
Okay,
and I lived
smashing.
There.
Thank you, Paula. Let's hear from Daniel Singleton to comment on the report.
Thank you, Stephen, and good to follow such excellent comments beforehand. There's a few points I want to make, and I think one of the things that this report is important, particularly important, is because it starts to deal with the whole concept of infrastructure, but not just the physical infrastructure, but the what that enables to happen. And I think that and the chart that Becky showed, which is quite hard to read, but you know, that purple line is very key. That effect for non-members, I think, is really key. As was mentioned, there has been the Keeping the Faith report that the APPG put together, and I see that others have mentioned the Churches Commission on Cohesion has been listed in the chat as well. This is a particular moment, and my team have been part of pulling together some research alongside Chris Baker, who did the first report to look at kind of Keeping the Faith 2 and following up. And one of the key things we've found is, although there was a huge increase and very positive noise made about the relationship with places of worship and faith groups throughout the pandemic, the concern pretty much uniformly now is that relationships would revert to how they were beforehand. And I think that's one of my concerns, is that we just bring out, we used to have that advert, didn't we? Dogs aren't just for Christmas. Well, my thing is faith is not just for emergencies. And I think that's part of what we need to see. There's an opportunity. And I would urge everyone, I've been thinking, well, what can we do? What can we do? I would urge everyone really to feel the ear of your local MP about the value of faith beyond the pandemic. Let's see if we can get a groundswell of noise so things happen. FaithAction is part of the Health and Wellbeing Alliance, which is the main relationship that the Department of Health has with the voluntary sector. So we saw the pandemic coming in policy terms beforehand, and it was fascinating to see the kind of the limbering up of faith groups to respond to the different needs there. But But part of that thing is actually to realize how much faith organizations and our church networks in particular have a role to those who are not seen to be part of the congregation. But there is this concept of the parish, which I think is so powerful. And I think that's one of the things that really struck me, that potentially one of the things I think we have to think about is, if there are not points of access, maybe there's not a physical building, or maybe there's not an easy way to connect because of the restrictions we see. How can people connect? Now, we know we've seen lots of people connect with places of worship online, and that's been very exciting for many people, but we also know that isolation has been a huge issue, and those two things continue side by side. So actually there is obviously a key role that we have as places of worship, as faith groups, in terms of responding particularly to isolation, and particularly in relationship. In the end, I'll tell you a quick story. I could see that with the rush on toilet paper, I knew that something was going to happen, and I went out and bought hot dog sausages. And my daughter said to me, "Why are you buying hot dog sausages?" And I said, "Well, when the government has to provide bread to everyone, I'll at least have something to put on the bread." And that's part of the thing, that actually there are some basic things we look for government to do, but it's those other things that we know are actually much more important for flourishing, the relationship, the connection, that kind of thing. The hot dog sausage, if you will, those are the bits that we can provide and make a difference with in that sense. And I think that's partly, as I'm really bending my thinking towards recovery, how can we use these assets that we have, which are mostly relational and infrastructural assets, to make a better recovery? So I really appreciate this report, and I actually appreciate all the other reports that have happened as well, because I think there is a particular moment of awareness. The recognition is very important, but actually part of my concern is that we don't get put in a box, and we don't just get wheeled out in emergency, but we actually look at what can faith do, what part can it play in recovery, and from here on in. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, very much. Thank you, everybody. There are a number of comments that have gone into the chat, I see, and more coming in. But at this point, I'm going to hand over to Daniel and ask you to field the question and answer and the discussion to come.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Daniel.
Just always want to say our appreciation of Stephen, his dedication, particularly on behalf of the Labour Party, but obviously in terms of part of this, chairing this group right from the inception, has been very key for some of the things we see at the moment. Excellent. I don't know if we can make, what we're going to ask people to do now is, if you want to make a particular point, there's been so many things in the chat, I don't think I can bring them, I can't read and digest them all, but what I want to do is give you opportunity to raise your hand. So I will turn off the chat and put on my participants bit, and maybe I think we might be able to get everyone on one screen. I don't know if that's possible there. Becky's doing the hand the old-fashioned way. So Becky, I'll let you come in, but just for everyone else, there should be an ability in your reactions button to actually put a hand. Oh, there you go, Becky's done that as well. To put a hand up and make some comments, and that would be good to hear from some other people. I believe that we've been joined by my colleague from down in Tower Hamlets, from Sophia as well, who can speak a little bit about what East London Mosque has done in this period of time. So we shall find her and bring her to the microphone if we can. Becky, some thoughts and reflections.
Well, it was actually picking up on something you said that we've been thinking about, which is, I agree with you about local authorities and really building on that. But I think there is a real practical issue. I know FaithAction is working on it, which is actually how those partnerships actually can be formed and work, because for an individual church, they have no idea, how do I get to work with my local authority? How can I speak to them? Who do I speak to? And in reverse, lots of secular bodies say notoriously difficult to know who they should speak to in the church. So I just wondered if you got plans to do more practical guidance about how we can continue those relationships. It's easier in rural areas because they know where their parish council is, and usually they're the same people. But so that was just a question, really.
A really helpful thing, and soon to arrive, particularly related to this issue of connecting with local authorities, is a toolkit that we've been putting together, particularly to help organisations and faith-based organisations, places of worship, if they want to develop a relationship particularly under the Faith Covenant banner, which we'll put something in the chat so you can see that. That's something that's been particularly pushed and promoted by the APPG. I can see we've got Ez Rosen and I'm sure some others from different Faith Covenant eras here, but that's a real opportunity to connect. But actually, even on the local level thing, it is worth, if there are organisations that are deciding, hey, we want to get connected more with local authorities, do just drop us a line, because we've got a number of resources available, and I'm sure we'll be tying up with York and others to kind of make that a bit more of a smoother run. So there's some things appearing in the chat for people to help there. I see, I think it's Sophia's got a hand up there. I can't see, you're very small on my screen today, Sophia. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to. Obviously, Baroness was talking somewhat about what was happening, but tell us what you've been up to.
Yeah, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for this report. I could resonate with a lot of this part of this report, because it stands for all faith organizations, I guess, especially in this pandemic. So just to introduce you to myself, I'm the head of the Mariam Centre at the East London Mosque, and I also overlooking the programmes at the East London Mosque as well. So the pandemic really shook us all kind of to a place where it was our faith and the strength in our faith that allowed us to act upon the work that we already do. So I remember Baroness Pollard in very early days reaching out and saying, Sophia, how can we help you? And it's that attitude that came across all faith organisations and authorities as well. I'm also the steering group member for the Tower Hamlets Interfaith Forum, and I've worked very closely with Daniel and Jenny, who's on this call as well. And what the Interfaith Forum allowed was this space where we were all collaborative and we're all on the same page as faith organisations. So, you know, early on, we tackled to keep faith places open, because we recognised the issues of loneliness and welfare and all the things that we do to reach out to all members of our community, you know, whether they're documented, undocumented, you know, facing domestic abuse
and just at those excellent points, we seem to have lost connection with Sophia, but I think we'll bring her back if she comes back online.
Is that people's turn?
Oh, you're back again. You're back again. We lost you at the point that you mentioned domestic violence. So.
Yeah. So I also included homelessness and all the things that faith organisations do very quietly. You still hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, my internet comes and goes. Too many people using it today. So one of the things I kind of organised, because our director was away in Bangladesh, and we all had to step up. And part of that stepping up was thinking about all those clients that came. Where would they go when our places were to be closed? So quickly working on the food bank and reaching out to members and non-members, because, you know, you don't, in a mosque setting, we don't have named congregation members, they're people off the streets, basically. So through our database, we were able to do that. Mariam Centre has a counselling service. We realised people still needed advice and support, and we went online. A lot of our congregation members couldn't come online because, you know, there was the technological poverty, if you like, which the digital inclusion that we've talked about many years, and I think, you know, we were able to prove that this was a big case. But nevertheless, people found their way, and we trained people to join online sessions, these services have been really vital, but what's been really amazing for me was to work as a collaborative body in the Interfaith Forum, to have one voice so that we're not competing against with one another. So example of that is when we decided to close the mosques, we wrote to the community, all faith groups, mosques and churches, that we're going to do this together. So we didn't single one faith group out of another. So that collaborative stance had a really big impact, because in the second wave we did start to stay open, and we found ways to safely stay open. And now we've got this Omicron coming, and we kind of know what to do. We know that we have to educate our community and our congregation.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And please do stay in touch. We're going to pop up some links because we've been working alongside Sophia, East London Mosque, and Tower Hamlets Interfaith Forum.
It has been really difficult in terms of getting resources, and some fundings are not always available for faith organisations.
Yeah. Excellent. Great, thank you very much. We'll put some links up because there's been some interesting innovative programs, and it's interesting to see how different, certainly within London, different faith forums are able to pull people together more coherently, which is what we've seen happen in Tower Hamlets. It's not always the way and doesn't have to be the way, but it's interesting to see. Trevor has been waiting there with his hand up, so let's jump across to you. Trevor, you've made some good points in the chat, so I'm not going to allow you to speak about all of them, but you can choose a couple.
Yeah, no, well, my main response was really going to be to Becky's point about toolkits for engaging with public authorities. I'm on the trust board of the Free Churches group that brought out that Social Cohesion Commission report that I put in the chat. If you scroll down on the link that's there, you'll see that there are two toolkit things there. One for how churches might engage with local authorities, and also a toolkit for policymakers and how they might engage with churches. But I think it's actually, I was involved in the commission, and I think that you could quite easily substitute churches for pretty much any faith institution, and there would be some really good work there. So I wouldn't want you to have to reinvent the wheel when as an organization we spent so much trying to actually put this into the hands of people just like yourselves here. So but the toolkits would be a good place for you to
that's a good point to pick up on. So there's a couple of things kicking up, and I think that's partly what colleagues at York are looking to do, is to kind of see where the gaps are and connect things. So Trevor, I just think it's important that you make the point about that you did make in the chat about communities, faith communities that don't necessarily have access.
Yeah, so my main engagement is CIC is an organisation called Churches in Communities. We predominantly represent those who are from the very new Pentecostal evangelical brand of churches, particularly working amongst diaspora communities, but also amongst the sort of indigenous communities of that sort of persuasion within Christianity. And a lot of them do not have their own buildings, but that's also true of a number of the smaller and even some historic church groups, and I'm sure it's true of other faith groups as well, that they're meeting in church halls, school halls, and other various public village halls and community buildings and so on. And it's then a case of when those got shut by their owners and landlords during the pandemic, there was still a large number of people that were wanting to be engaged. And when a report like this comes out that seems to be engaging so strongly with those with a lot of capital resource, I would beg that you also get involved with those of us who have got a lot of human resource on the ground and embedded in communities, and maybe we could do something that actually bridges the historic new divide. That would be really exciting, as well as across the faith divide. For those from other faith groups, I'm also on the Christian Muslim Forum as a representative of the president for the Free Churches side of things. And thanks,
Trevor. That's good. And we've got a couple of hands up. If we can get a bit of a queue of people, that'd be good. So don't worry about putting your hand up and waiting for a while. It's all right. Dee.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Trevor. That's really helpful. The report that you mentioned, obviously, there's so much common ground there with what we're looking at. We're very conscious of the enormous work that is being done by church groups who don't necessarily have their own buildings, and but have sometimes had to look to churches that do possess buildings in order to share resource. And I think that's very much what we want to see, encourage that collaboration between that people capital and other kinds of resource, and the importance of that collaboration as we move forward. And also that it's really important. We would love to work with you on the new resource we're developing, because it is for all churches. And there's so much to learn. And we are so against reinventing any wheels whatsoever of any shape or form, because it's a complete waste of time in a situation where we don't have time or the capacity to do that. But I think it would be really helpful to be able to talk further with you about this, and to see where we can collaborate and pull things together. We feel very much we are just one contributor to this conversation. We managed to get a certain amount of resource. We had to focus mainly on the Church of England as a lens through which to look at this situation, because we only had so much money and it was happening very quickly. But it is underlying all of this is that it's about all churches and indeed about all faith communities, and our ability to work together, keep this agenda going. And picking up on Daniel's point, and as somebody asked earlier, should the churches be seen as the emergency service? Well, yes, they are, as other faith communities are. But we clearly don't want to just be that. We want to say, moving forward, we are a vital part of what happens going forward. And that will mean resource, training, support, because why would you not use this amazing network in order to build the recovery? And why would you put other things in place when small amounts of investment could bring all of this to life in a new and really exciting way?
That's very interesting. And I think, I forget if it was a comment someone said or something in the chat about actually funding to go to places of worship and faith groups, not necessarily for their community, but because of those that they serve outside. And I think that's an interesting thing. I know that the Cinema Network did a number of audits, particularly looking at that kind of service to the public. We have a little tool we put together many years ago called the Local Impact Assessment that looks to do that. But there's some interesting things there about a legitimacy of why funding should come over. Kate.
Thank you, Daniel. I wanted to pick up on partly on, again, Trevor, on one of your points, but also a question or comment in the chat from Jen about the Culture Recovery Fund. And I think you're right, Trevor, that many places of worship have access to what you might think of as sort of, capital rich in terms of a building. But actually what was also, I think, highlighted by the way in which many places of worship responded were the limitations of current buildings. So much was done with ancient places of worship or, village halls or community centres, but also greater needs of accessibility. We talked, Sophia and the Baroness talked about digital literacy and access to online content, live streaming. How can we make the buildings that are serving these functions fit for purpose and resilient for the future? And I think there's a lot of common cause there with community centres and village halls in rural areas. And of course, those buildings and those possible partnerships have been equally impacted by COVID and lack of fundraising and revenue generation. So we would see this as an opportunity to be in partnership with other charitable funders, thinking about the potential for these buildings as hubs for social action, but also for that kind of wider community use and sustaining community life and activity in a kind of rich and varied way, not just in crisis mode, as Dee said. We're not just the 999 service. We want these places to be community hubs for all areas of future community life, for public engagement, placemaking, identity forging, and community cohesion. And I think that's another really important strand of the report and its findings.
Excellent, thank you. Does make me think, actually, Kate, while you were speaking, does make me think about what the trickle-down effect for places of worship will be on architecture, how people actually design spaces in light of what we've seen. Hopefully not with a whole bunch of screens in them, but I suppose that may happen for a little while. It's poignant because my faith community is about to embark on a building project, and I suspect we might do it differently if we had that knowledge. I'm very aware of the time. I want to appreciate everyone coming, and I think what we will try to do, but it may take a little while to do this, is we will tried to get some of the comments made into little bullet points or something that we'll post up as well. But I suspect what we can do is we can post the chat up. Sorry, you can post the recording relatively swiftly, but may have to wait to the new year to get those other things. I just want to give Baroness Udin an opportunity to make a last point, and then we'll close. Baroness.
I just want to say thank you to everyone, and I think it would be really good. I'm not a very large Twitter followers or anything, tweeting, Facebooks, and all of that about this discussion. It would be really, really good for those who does.
That's a good point. Yes, and there is some stuff. I managed to put the odd tweet out during the session. Do have a little look at that.
I did too.
Well done. I'm going to look for yours. You like mine and I'll like yours, and we'll start a kind of avalanche of discussion.
I like that.
We're trying to do that in the email. We're trying to follow up with some key Twitter handles so people can pick up on that as well. If Stephen Timms was here, I know that he would not let us get away without talking a little bit more about the work of the APPG, and particularly the Faith Covenant. So we have now 24 local authorities that have signed up for the Faith Covenant. Now, I'm about to pluck the number of people that covers, but I believe it's about 5 million people are covered by a Faith Covenant, whether they know it or not. And we've seen that increasingly during the pandemic, during lockdown, that the Covenant, plus other points of connection, other Faith Forum where there's relationships and different things like that, but wherever there was an existing relationship, it became a well-worn route for connection. People often talked about food partners. I think we got folk from CAP here today, but where there was existing food partnerships, they were utilized and used during this time. And we are seeing a growth of interest in the Faith Covenant. Of course, the government itself has put out some activity around the Faith New Deal. There's a discussion going on tonight. To be very welcome to join us about that. So far, the government has not announced the winners, as far as we know, in terms of that bidding round, but it was quite a small amount of money considering the amount of interest. And I think that's part of the things we know that within the faith sector, if I can call it that, there's considerable interest in how we interface and play a part with the rest of civil society and with government, and it feels like there is that key moment. So I would ask that you do get connected. Obviously, the folk from York have talked a little bit about their projects, and please be aware of that. Please also check out faithandsociety.org. That's the website for the APPG. And FaithAction, we've got any number of resources available to you, and a free membership as well that gives you access to all of those resources. So please have a look at that. That's www.faithaction.net. We'll be sending further information around. If you're in a local authority area and a place where you're starting to consider having a faith covenant or some kind of faith compact or faith contract, we're not all that precious about the name, then please do connect. I see my colleague Matt Allen's here, and we will soon be having another Faith Covenant forum meeting. So that's where we bring people together using the wonders of Zoom to be able to connect and bring people together to discuss with those who have an existing covenant and those who are thinking about it and those who are thinking of revising it. I see that Southampton's considering a bit of a revision, so that gives a great opportunity. But I just want to thank you all for coming today. Thank you for the points you made on the chat. We will look to add those to the event report, and thank you for your time. Do stay in touch, and if you want to join us tonight, we will put up in the link the event for tonight as well. Oh, there you go, it's there already. Jenny's put up the new deal, looking at the new deal that's on tonight. It'll be good to hear from you then. But with that, we'll close the event, and thank you for your participation. Thank you very much.